There's something I've learned over these couple of years playing Sonic games and watching other people play Sonic games. A lot of people are not very good at playing Sonic games. Platformers are sometimes seen as the easiest genre to jump into. This is very clear with Nintendo's platformers like Mario and Kirby, which are very beginner friendly. When it comes to playing Sonic games, however, the average gamer tends to fall apart when the controller is in their hands trying to get through a Sonic game. Usually when you hear about difficult platformers, something like Mega Man or classic Castlevania tends to be brought up the most. But Sonic tends to be the hardest for people to adapt to. Why is that? What makes Sonic so difficult to play for people? Is it because the games are poorly designed? Or is it just because people stink at Sonic games? Well, the complicated answer is what we plan to get to the bottom of.
We? Now we going to war. What do you mean we?
Yes, I did say we because I'm not doing this video alone. I've enlisted the help of my good friend Ant. He's played as many Sonic games as I have and has a vast knowledge of how these games operate and what makes them fun. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, my name is Ant. I sometimes go by LoadTad. I'm somewhat of a big Sonic fan. You can find me on Twitter at @theinsect_. A lot of my favorite Sonic games are the ones people find the most difficult to, or trial and error, and I also play a lot of platformers, so I wanted to help out with this one. And with that, let's get down to it.
So, there are a few things that new players struggle with when it comes to picking up and playing a Sonic game. Now, this may not always apply, but these are some of the common complaints that I tend to hear from people. Number 1. Sonic moves too fast. Now you're probably thinking, well duh, Sonic the Hedgehog, of course he's supposed to move fast. Yes, but that's not exactly the point. Compared to other platformers that come with some sort of run button or a capped default speed, Sonic is much more dependent on momentum and physics. In both 2D and 3D, Sonic is faster than the average platformer character, and that can be an issue for people. One of the biggest rewards in playing a Sonic game is being able to keep your speed going with little to no stopping and clearing the stage in a fast, efficient, and stylish manner. However, most casual gamers aren't going to get that if they don't play Sonic as much as I do. If you're playing a 2D Sonic game, you can start building up your speed and suddenly BAM! Gets hit by an enemy you couldn't see in time. BAM! Get hit by spikes you couldn't see in time. BAM! Fall into a bottomless pit you weren't prepared for. Which can be frustrating. 3D Sonics can be hard to adjust to because they change in style so frequently, and that includes in speed. So grasping the controls can be hard. Then when we get to the boost type games which heavily rely on reaction times, it might be too much for people. Which is why you probably see a lot of footage of people playing boost Sonic games where they just are afraid to boost. So yeah, people are afraid of Sonic going too fast for them. Zoomzyke made a good video expressing how Sonic's speed can be inherently flawed and the different ways Sega tried to work around Sonic's speed. I recommend checking it out after this video. Number 2. The controls. This is something more about the 3D games than the 2D ones because most of the 2D Sonic games control the same even when they're being worked on by different people. 3D Sonic games do not stay the same all the time. Mario may come with a new gimmick each game, but the core controls of Mario usually stays the same. Sonic's core gameplay changes all the time in 3D. You would have 2, maybe 3 games where they're the same, but then Sonic Team switches it up for something completely different. Now you have to readjust to a new gameplay style that changes the fundamentals of Sonic. Not only that, but these games also come with multiple different playable characters that come with their own gameplay styles that changes things up. Treasure hunting, mech shooting, fishing, kart racing. While characters may control similarly, they have their own speeds and physics, so it can take a lot to absorb going through these different playstyles. Number 3. Sonic games don't properly convey how to play their games. This reason is going to have its own dedicated section explaining how each game goes about teaching the players how to play the game, but when people play Sonic games and struggle, there tends to be a complaint that these games don't properly tell you what to do. This point will definitely come into play when we talk about the trial and error aspect and how each Sonic game displays the information. Again, these are just my observations from what I've noticed from other people, and there may be some things I've missed, but Sonic proves to be a struggle for casual folks consistently.
Alright, one of my own observations when it comes to Sonic games is that earlier Sonic games tend to have a simple pickup control set. Instead of having a run button like Mario, Sonic was just given 3 jump buttons. This carried into the adventure games and heroes where we got one extra button. Usually the action button is on X or B, and while this technically makes the game more accessible and even possible to beat one-handed, especially good for disabilities, it also leads to the issue that there is simply too much mapped on one button sometimes. Can't have lightspeed dashes, tornadoes, and bounces and spin dashes all on the same button. It leads to plenty of accidents for people inexperienced, and sometimes the game just won't register the right one you want it to do. Games with this issue are particularly like Sonic Adventure 2, Heroes, Sonic 06, where you want a lightspeed dash and then sometimes it just won't come out. Sonic Unleashed has air boosting and homing attack on X, which sometimes you would just try to air boost or try to homing attack and you'll just do the other opposite thing. Heroes suffered from this the most because a lot of the actions mapped on the same button are very slippery. Looking at you, Omega.
To circle back on the biggest satisfaction of playing a Sonic game, being able to keep your speed going with little to no stopping and clearing the stage in a fast, efficient, and stylish manner. You may not get it the first few times, but it'll become second nature to you the more you keep playing and trying. This is where the trial and error aspect of Sonic games come into play. You may get hit by the same enemy 4 to 5 more times when you replay the stage, but maybe during your 6th run, you remember where that enemy is and you hit him on the way. That's when things start clicking for you. Now you know when to expect the enemy, when the spike traps are coming, when to stop because you're about to be crushed or fall into a pit. Trial and error is just a normal aspect of life. You are not going to get it the first time, and it's going to be frustrating during the learning process when you fail again and again. When the memorization kicks in, you start trying new strats, applying all that you know, you'll start seeing the improvements and the game starts becoming more fun. Sonic games benefit a lot from having replay value, and a lot of that replay value stems from games having the ranking system or time attack mode. Replayability is something that Sonic really excels at over other platformers. Not that you can't find replayability in other platformers, you most certainly can. However, what they lack compared to Sonic is that feeling of incentive, or they don't really have those individual levels that really stand out. The ranking system and time attack modes is that incentive for Sonic games. You don't even have to replay the entire game, you might just have that fix for those couple levels you really like and want to run through them again and again. You might get a C rank the first time, play more and learn, you'll get a B rank, and then eventually, you'll easily end up getting those S ranks with no problem. Why? Because you went back, learned, and adapted your skills to get better. You probably started off not liking the game at first, but the better you got, the more enjoyable the game became for you. Or just more tolerable. We'll get to that last bit later.
To add in, I feel like there's a bit of a problem in how some Sonic games do hand out S ranks. Pointing specifically at Generations, it's easy to improve in Generations. It's a slightly easier game to beginners and good entry point in the series, but the game absolutely never tells you when you're playing like shit. This game hands out like S ranks like candy, and you could probably get S ranks by not knowing how to boost properly. I've seen this in a couple playthroughs of like the Game Grumps. It's hard to tell if you're bad at something if the game is constantly telling you you're the GOAT. I don't think this is considered ease of access. When I was younger, I got E ranks in Heroes and SA2, and I still love those games. I don't think Sonic games need to hand out S ranks like candy.
Now that we've set everything up, let's go back to one of the main complaints casual folks have with Sonic games. Sonic games don't properly convey how to play their games, which is something I always thought was interesting because the games add in a lot of things to make sure you don't get lost or confused on how to play. Let's go through a couple of Sonic games and see how each of them handle giving information. Sonic Adventure. Before you start any of the stories, there is an instructions option that pops up along confirming the story you want to play. The instructions show you the basic controls of how to play the game, the specific abilities, and how to clear the game. They even give extra tips about the character, like how you have to hold down when a fish grabs onto the bait when playing big so you can hook them. Clear-cut information on how to complete the game. Sonic Adventure also introduces hub worlds, and you might be worried about getting lost. Well, that's where Tikal comes in. Tikal's orb of light will always be in specific areas of the hub world for you to talk to her, and she'll give you hints on what you need to do next. She'll tell you where to go, what specific items you may need to grab, and it's not just restricted to the hub world. She also gives you hints during the stages, and specifically with Knuckles, she can just straight up tell you where the Master Emerald pieces are if you just want to get through the stage. Sonic Adventure 2. You know Omochao, right? Yeah, the little demon spawn that won't stop yapping about the most trivial things. Well, he is your ultimate tutorial machine. He is in every stage in the game, and there are multiples of him, so he is always around to tell you something about the stage or any sort of mechanics. Does he tend to repeat the same things a little too often? Yeah, but he is not completely useless. For example, while gathering footage for Sonic Adventure 2, I actually got lost in Security Hall because I forgot to activate the locks. On the second reset, Omochao told me that the top floor has switches I can hit to activate the locks, which was actually very helpful because I don't often replay the treasure hunting levels in Sonic Adventure 2. So, thanks Omochao. Not only that, but there is a dedicated menu where Omochao tells you about the different playstyles of each characters in the game, how to control them, what are their goals to complete the stage, what their upgrades do, and some extra tidbits. Now I should add that this tutorial menu does come from the original Dreamcast and GameCube version of Sonic Adventure 2. This is how the tutorial menu looks in the Steam port of Sonic Adventure 2. I don't know why they took it out and replaced it for this manual, but yeah, it's not very good, let me just say that. The treasure hunting stages have hint monitors that gives you hints on where the Master Emerald pieces could be. This one requires a bit more memorization from replaying and recalling the level layouts, but if you're someone who plays Sonic Adventure 2 often, then the hint monitors are very helpful. The Chao Kindergarten also gives you some details about the Chao from the professor. One thing both adventure games do as well is give you hints when you die to a boss and how to beat them. So, the game offers a lot of helpful avenues. Sonic Heroes goes in a bit of a different route to teach players the game. There's a dedicated tutorial stage that you can play here in this menu before going into the main story. If you just decide to skip it for some reason, you will be forced to play it once starting Team Rose's story anyway. They also added these info bubbles all around the level so the characters could give insight to the player on what they should do or how to control something. There are also monitors that tell you what characters you need to be for certain platforming challenges. You want to know another main aspect about Sonic Heroes? The characters like to yap a lot in this game. Like with every set piece, characters will give their input about the situation at hand. While people may find this annoying, this aspect of Sonic Heroes is actually part of the tutorial. Characters will tell you what characters you should switch to during certain situations, how to interact with the grind rails, and such. This philosophy of display information also bleeds into future games like Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, Sonic and the Secret Rings, Sonic Unleashed, and Sonic and the Black Knight. With Sonic 06 adding hub worlds to the games, that game now has NPCs with the orange markers to give you hints on what to do and where to go. Also, when you're doing missions, the NPCs make sure to tell you beforehand on what to do. Sonic Colors has the Tails navigation and info bubbles, Sonic Generations has Omochao makes his return, Sonic Lost World and Sonic Forces go back to having the info bubbles, Sonic Frontiers has a separate tutorial area you can go to practice your combat moves, Shadow Generations actually goes back to the Sonic Heroes method of having info bubbles back in the stages. You can also turn on button prompts to tell you what to do during certain parts of stages and boss fights. In the pause menu in the white space, you can go into the Q&A section to get all the information you need to know how to play the game. That was a lot, right? As you can see, a lot of Sonic games go out of their way to steer you onto the right path and make sure you know what to do. Whether they're the most engaging way to make tutorials is a completely different argument. I think you will have to have your brain off and intentionally ignoring the game if you somehow get lost in a Sonic game. The only game I can understand you getting lost in is Sonic Riders. They did not do a good job explaining anything to you in that game. It took people a long time to warm up to Sonic Riders because people just ain't know how to properly play it and they sucked. It was not a beginner-friendly racing game. Besides that one main exception, I think Sonic games overall do a decent job and give the casual players all the information they need to succeed in these games.
I would like to point at some of the lesser played handheld games and say that these are some of the worst at telling you information. Some of these games may have had manuals telling you how to play, but Sonic Rush drops you in the Leaf Storm and tells you nothing. I didn't know there was a homing attack in this game until I watched a Some Call Me Johnny review on it. For those of you who don't know, it's on the L button. It's not the best or even required to beat the game, but it exists. And I used to get stuck on Night Carnival because I didn't know you had to use the R button to do tricks to lift you up and hit springs. And it's like, the game does not tell you that whatsoever. There's also an easy difficulty in the game, but the difficulty setting doesn't really do anything besides lessen the amount of hits bosses take, which you should be enabling because the bosses in Sonic Rush suck, but that's another story. The advanced games have a similar problem. Advanced 1 has a simple, easy to understand moveset, but Advanced 2 and 3 just kinda expect you to read an instruction manual. They don't really tell you much. There's just moves in the game that simply exist just to exist. Rush Adventure fixes this by having Tails ask you if you want to practice or learn your moves at the beginning of the game, but I think that would have been really helpful earlier. Are difficulty options really needed in Sonic games? Usually when a game is too hard for newcomers, the first argument that's made is that there should be an easy difficulty. I don't agree with this at all for stuff like Elden Ring. Let's take a look at the Sonic games' past attempts at an easy difficulty. Sonic 2 and 3 and Mania attempt to suit Tails being able to fly and skip over hard platforming. I think this is a solid option because the games are completable and you don't miss out on too much, and you still have to learn what enemies do and defeat bosses. Sonic Heroes is the first Sonic game to ever be multi-platform at launch, so they wanted to make it a game aimed at a wider audience and added more difficulties. Team Rose is their attempt at an easy mode. While I love Heroes, I do not exactly think this was the best decision. Number 1 is that you aren't explicitly told that unless you hit Omochao on the menu. Number 2 is that Team Rose would probably be someone's last choice. I mean, come on. It's Team Rose. It's Big the Cat. I boot up the game and I think, ooh, Shadow the Hedgehog, I'm gonna play as them. I think a simple easy mode option could have helped. However, make it so you can't access the final story this way or something. Up until Sonic Forces, there weren't any more attempts at an easy mode, and Sonic Forces has a very laughable attempt at difficulty settings. Essentially, the lower difficulty option is that you have a max cap of 100 rings, and I guess you lose less. I don't know, it doesn't really do anything in the grand scheme of things, because name one enemy that does something in Forces. Maybe spike pits, but if you fall in spikes, you're likely grabbing your rings back anyway. This doesn't do shit for anyone. Who is it aimed at? Frontiers has combat, so its easy mode is only focused on that rather than platforming. However, in Update 3, the easy mode actually does add some platforming shortcuts, kind of like Mega Man 2 or Mega Man 10. Add platforming to hard sections on their difficulty settings. This is dope. I think that's awesome. Keep that up. Anyways, I do not think most Sonic games need an easy mode, but if they are to get added, maybe do it more in a way that the classic games do it, through an easier controlling character. Games like Sonic Riders could have easier AI or easier objectives. Either way, people asking for an easy mode are probably too stubborn to use it anyway.
To quickly go back to the classic games, Tails is a good example of having an easy mode without changing the core game. However, they actually have attempted to do this before. Do you guys remember Sonic Jam on the Sega Saturn? This was a compilation package with Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and Knuckles, while also featuring the Sonic World, which was our first glimpse of Sonic in 3D. This is one of the best Sonic compilations out there, but this game actually attempted something that hadn't been done before. When playing the classic games, you have the option to play the game on original, normal, and easy. Original mode is essentially how the games are in their normal forms. Normal mode adds some rings and has some small level design changes. Easy mode has the most changes, however. They not only add more rings and helpful items, but they straight up remove levels out of the game. For example, in Sonic 1 easy mode, after beating Green Hill Act 1, you jump straight into Marble Zone Act 1. In Sonic 2's easy mode, you start in Act 2, and not only that, all the bosses are now 3 hits. So, they take even less time to beat. The craziest part of Sonic 2 Easy Mode is that they just straight up remove Wing Fortress Zone after completing Sky Chase. Like, what? This is definitely the most extreme way of making a Sonic game easy, and I'm not really a fan of it. I think adding more rings, item boxes, and removing some spike tracks or enemies are fine enough. Removing large chunk of the games is not the way to do it. The Sonic Advance games actually do have an easy mode setting in their games, but their equivalent of an easy mode is taking out some of the BS enemy placement that these games are known to have due to the Game Boy Advance's small screen. It does make the games a little less annoying to run through, but it doesn't really fix the level design issues these games still have. You can see what they were trying to do with Sonic Heroes and having different difficulties, but I'll have to agree with Ant here and say that there should be a difficulty toggle so that Team Sonic can essentially have what Team Rose has without playing as Team Rose. I think how they handled it was okay, shortening the stages in length, having mostly weaker enemies throughout the stages, the bosses having less health to deal with, adding more helpful platforms and item boxes. They did a decent job. Now, I get it. They want to make all the teams have a purpose, and that's why it is structured the way it is. This is more of an internal Sonic Heroes problem, but for people's first time playing Sonic Heroes, people's first priority is going to be the cooler characters like Team Sonic and Team Dark, not Team Rose consisting of Amy Rose, Cream the Rabbit, and Big the Cat. Sonic Team's track record of implementing an easy mode hasn't been good, so when a previous entry tends to be viewed as too tough, they tend to dial it back a lot while also making things a little too Mickey Mouse. This happened with the transition with Sonic Riders to Zero Gravity. Zero Gravity is very inoffensive, but geez, the slow movement of the game, the dumbing down of the trick system, the track design with the anti-gravity gimmick overall, Zero Gravity can be very boring. They've definitely also reduced the difficulty in the boost games after Unleashed, which then leads to Sonic Forces being so pathetically easy that it is not even worth trying to use any sort of brain power for that game. I mean, look at this. Isn't this fun? The last point we're going to talk about is a very interesting debate. When you're going through all these struggles to try and improve in these games, many trials and errors, and you're still getting your butt kicked, is it because the game is bad, or is it because you're bad? Now, I'm not actually saying you're bad, but when some people have a distaste for a game, sometimes it is because they struggle adapting to it, and it is not really the game's fault, but more the fault of the player. To give an example, for the longest time, I used to really hate Sonic and the Black Knight because I felt the combat controls were too sluggish and there was too much stopping that I was not having fun. Now, for the most part, I actually was just wiggling around the Wii Remote like an idiot and not really paying attention to what was going on. Then when I played it again as I got older, I learned the existence of the homing attack air slash that cuts through enemies quickly so I can keep the pace. I started properly timing the Soul Surge attack to do proper damage on big enemies and bosses to keep my meter up. With these few changes, Sonic and the Black Knight actually became a pretty fun game to run through, and I had very little problem because the game actually wasn't that difficult. It was because I got better. Now, just because you got better at a game doesn't always equate to the game actually being good or well designed. You're just able to better tolerate the bad parts of the game. Is Shadow the Hedgehog's level design and mission structure still garbage? Yes. Is Sonic 06 still a buggy slog to get through? Yes. Is Sonic in the Secret Ring still one of Satan's most vile creations on this earth? Sure, of course it is.
One of Satan's greatest soldiers.
Some games can't be saved no matter how much better you get at them. There are some you can definitely argue for though. Let's take the Sonic Advance games for example. The screen crunch of these games is the biggest problem when it comes to playing them. Because you can't see much of what's coming, you fall into a lot of unfair enemy placements, pitfalls, and crushing traps that these games are really known for. So let's say, okay, you've played the game so much to the point where you know where all these traps are. Does that make the level design any better? Well, not really. It definitely makes going through the levels a lot more tolerable, but that doesn't exactly make all the levels good. I think the two games that really feed into the skill issue conversation are Sonic Heroes and Sonic Unleashed. One of Sonic Heroes' biggest complaints are the controls. The speed character's acceleration is way too fast to make smooth turns, and the deceleration is too slippery so it's hard to come to a complete stop most of the time. This makes the player feel that Sonic Heroes is taking the control away from the player because of the physics. On top of Heroes in general already not being the most technically sound game. There's also the special stages, which people have called one of the worst in the series due to the same control issues, but the problems seem to have heightened when trying to move left and right just sends you all over the place and you can't control your character. These are problems that even I can admit that Sonic Heroes does have, and people's critiques of it are valid. I replay Sonic Heroes a lot compared to other Sonic games, and it is one of my favorite games in the series. So I've adapted and found workarounds for some of these issues. Like for tight platforming or rail switching, I always switch to the flight character. If I want to slow down my deceleration, I switch to the power character for that. I'm one of the few people who believe that the Sonic Heroes special stages aren't actually that hard. I didn't say they're good, but they're not actually hard to clear. The easy way to beat these special stages are, number 1, never switch off the speed character because they have the highest acceleration, so you'll always be able to keep up the pace with the Emerald. Number 2, lightly move the control stick with your thumb when moving left or right so you don't go veering off to the sides like a madman. And number 3, always hold down the boost button to actually go faster. Mashing it is actually slower. With these things in mind, when I come back to play Sonic Heroes, I am always having a blast. However, this comes with me playing this game for decades, so everything is second nature to me. You know what Sonic Heroes reminded me of, and I can't believe I didn't think of this before? The original Jet Set Radio. Another game where its criticisms comes from its wonky controls and physics. I can say when I first played the original Jet Set Radio, I hated the controls and did not find the game very fun. However, the more I went back to replay it, I got better and started to understand how to control the game more smoothly. Now, while this made me like and appreciate the game a little more, I can't say I love or prefer how the original Jet Set Radio controls compared to a game like Future, where I think that game's control style is much better for its game type. It always comes back to Jet Set Radio for me. Anyways, Sonic Unleashed is another game that is very punishing for new players. This is the fastest Sonic has ever been. Your reaction times have to be on point and you have to stay sharp. You are definitely going to boost off the level, drifting into the dirt or to your death, slapping your face into spike balls, or dying because you weren't ready to do the QTEs. Sonic Unleashed really lets you know when you suck. This is a game where you have to constantly replay stages over and over again before you start being able to handle Sonic's speed. You remember what's coming up and the optimal pathways to take for the fastest time. When you get it, Sonic Unleashed feels like one of the most exhilarating games you will ever play. But starting off, it feels like the game is punishing you very, very harshly. Your skill level can really affect your opinion on a game, but even if you do get better, it doesn't always equate to the game itself being good. Maybe you just don't feel like getting better and you just hate the game. They say there is no wrong way to play a game, but there is a better way to play games if you take the time to learn. This is what makes Sonic so interesting for me. It is a little harder than the average platformer, but when things start clicking the more you play, you start to see some of the beauty that a lot of Sonic games bring, and you get a I get it moment with it. The games themselves have shown me how I can get better, and I also learn from other people to make my experiences more smooth. So, are Sonic games accessible enough to general audiences? Yes, I do believe so. However, in a lot of cases, it won't be easy to grasp at first. That's just part of life though, and you only start understanding once you start giving things a try. Again and again. Maybe it might not ever be for you. And that's also okay. We all handle things differently. I want to give a special shout out to my boy Ant. Thank you so much for working with me on this video, and I hope we can make more collabs in the future. So, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a good day.